Good morning, hello everyone. We will start the webinar briefly. We're just waiting for a few more people to log in. So if you just give us 1 or 2 minutes more, and then we'll start the thing off properly. So just bear with us in a minute or so. Thanks very much. Okay, hello again everyone. We're going to make a start. There's probably a few people still kind of getting things together. So we'll make a start now and we can join us. So this morning there's going to be a brief introduction by Anne-Marie Towers and a brief introduction to ASCOT. If at any point anyone has a question that they would like to ask, please click the little hand icon and you should be able to see that you're raising your hand to ask a question. Alternatively, there is a question facility where you can type your question. And, we will get to your questions at the end of each presentation. I think that's everything we need to say in terms of admin. Anne-Marie.
Okay. Hi, Ed. Ed, can you hear me?
Oh, hi, Birgit. Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, hi. Good. It worked. Eventually, it worked. Fantastic.
Yeah. So we've just made a start. We're going to. Anne-Marie's just about to do her introduction.
Ah, okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Hi everybody. It's Anne-Marie here. Welcome to the webinar. Just keep it going. Okay. So I'm going to begin with a little bit of an overview of ASCOT. I shall do it as quickly as I can, but it's really for the benefit of people who don't know that much about it and would like a little bit of background, and to save time for all our presenters. Otherwise, they'll each be telling you the same information over and over again. But before I do that, just to remind everybody that, and welcome our speakers for today. We've got, after my introduction, we'll have Lynn Phillipson, who is from ASRI, which is the Australian Health Services Research Institute at the University of Wollongong. I hope that I've pronounced that correctly, and this goes for everybody actually. After that, we will have Ismo Linosma, I hope I pronounced that right, Ismo, Centre for Health and Social Economics at the National Institute of Health and Welfare, THL in Finland. And after that, we've got Birgit Trukashitz from the Research Institute of Economics of Aging, which is at the Vienna University of Economics and Business in Austria. So some really good and interesting presentations. So just to give a quick overview for those who aren't familiar, the Adult Social Care Outcomes Toolkit is a collection of tools for measuring the outcomes of service users, and now we also have measures for family and unpaid carers. And it cuts across social care services and interventions, which basically means it can be used in home care, home, low-level services, and across the board. ASCOT measures something that we call social care-related quality of life, which are basically the domains of quality of life that we would expect to be affected by social or long-term care services. However, something that we felt was very important in its development is that these domains could also be compared with the general population. So we need to make sure our domains were also broad enough to apply to everyone, even those who are not receiving long-term social services. We have a website, which I'm sure everybody who has signed up to is familiar with, and this will be being updated very soon, so it's going to have a new look. The web address there, I think, is staying the same, so that link will change, hopefully, in the next couple of weeks. But do go there for further information. So just to give everybody a little overview of the domains of care-related quality of life, I'm focusing here on our service user measures, which are the ones that everyone will be talking about today. We have 4 basic domains of care-related quality of life: personal cleanliness and comfort, food and drink, personal safety, clean and comfortable accommodation, and then we have higher order domains, which is the social participation and involvement domain, control over daily living, occupation, by which we mean anything from taking part in work activities, voluntary activities, all the way through to hobbies and leisure time, And finally, dignity, which is about the way in which you're treated and how that makes you feel. The way ASCOT works is that for each of these 8 outcome domains, we look at the person's quality of life according to 4 outcome states. So if you were to read the interviews or the questionnaires, you would see response options that relate to these 4 outcome states. The first one is the ideal state, which basically means that the person's needs and preferences are met. So in terms of the policy agenda, we'll be looking at things like personalisation for this level. The second level down is no needs, and that basically means that the person's basic needs are being met in that domain, that area of their quality of life, but perhaps not as personalised as it could be, not quite to that desired level. We sometimes call this level mustn't grumble. The third one down is some needs, and by that we mean they have some of their needs met, but there are gaps. So there are some unmet needs for this area of their life, and by that we mean that it's sufficiently important or frequent to affect their quality of life. And finally, we have high-level needs. And this means that there are mental or physical health implications if they're not met over a period of time. This could be because of the severity of the need, for example, they're not getting any food, or it could be because of the number of small things in that area of their life that are collectively having a big impact. So once a person has completed a questionnaire or taken part in an interview, for example, and given their responses according to these outcome states in each domain, the scores are entered in to the spreadsheet or entered into your data set, and from those ratings we can derive 3 scores. The first one is called current social care related quality of life, and this measures the person's situation now. And usually that would be with services in place, but occasionally people take a baseline before services. But it describes whatever their state of quality of life is like now. The next one is what we call expected. Not all measures in ASCOT measure the expected, but those that do, such as the interviews, what they do is they ask questions to estimate what a person's quality of life would be like if they did not have those services. They did not have that help and nobody else stepped in. So what we don't do is assume that carer steps in and picks up the slack for that lack of service. So we're trying to look at the overall impact. And what we can do using those 2 scores is we can take an estimation of the impact the service is having. And we do this by taking the current score, current quality of life score with services in place, and taking away the expected score. It's a simple sum, and that tells us what the person is gaining in terms of quality of life from that service. We call that social care related quality of life gain. Okay, so just to recap, ASCOT measures social care related quality of life. There are 8 domains that we look at, and they're all domains that have been proven to be sensitive to the impact of social care. For most of the measures, there are 4 levels or 4 outcome states per domain. They range from the ideal down to high needs. All measures look at current social care related quality of life, so what the person's quality of life is like now. And some of the ASCOT measures estimate that expected score, so what the person's life would be like if they didn't receive help and support. And where we have both of those derived scores, we can calculate the impact of the service or social care related quality of life gain. So I just wanted to give you all an overview of that because I think some of that language will be used in some of these presentations. So hopefully you will have a better understanding now of what the speakers are referring to. And I'm sure they might touch on this a bit in their own presentations. Okay, so I'm going to hand back over to Alan and we'll have our first speaker, who is Lynn Phillipson.
Thanks very much, Anne-Marie. Okay, so it doesn't look like there's any questions from that first introductory bit. Just to reiterate, if someone needs to ask a question, then please raise your hand. There's a little hand icon you should see on the control panel, or you can use the questions facility where you can type a question. So now we will hand over to Curtin Boone. I'm just about to make you presenter. There we go, over to you, Lynn. Ready when you are.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm very much looking forward to participating in this webinar tonight and hearing about the different applications of the use of the ASCOT suite in different countries throughout the world. It's been my great pleasure to be doing some work with James Kale and Anne-Marie Towers, both from the PSSRU here in Australia, and looking at testing the use of a version of one of the ASCOT tools in the suite, which is an easy read version, which had been previously beta tested with younger people with autism and intellectual disability. And so I was very interested in how a tool like this might be able to be utilised to understand the voice of people who have cognitive impairment with other from other conditions. And my particular area of focus, as you can see from my title, is people living with dementia, cognitive impairment, and I particularly in this study have been looking at the suitability and the utility of the easy read version of the ASCOT with community dwelling older people with cognitive impairment. So I hope that you gain something from learning a bit about our experience with this tool in Australia, and I look forward to your questions at the end of the presentation. Sorry about that, I had some problems with my screen freezing. So just to give you a little bit of an outline of what we'll be covering today, I thought I'd start by giving you a little bit of context in Australia and what's been happening in our social care system here in Australia, and particularly focusing on the big reforms that we've been experiencing in the context of the delivery of aged care services. I think this context is particularly important because it highlights why in Australia we have a real need at the moment for alternative tool formats to allow us to assess social care related quality of life in Australia. And to help us to try and understand the impact of these reforms that we're experiencing in the aged care sector. I'll talk to you a bit about our experience of testing the ASCOT Easy Read survey and its suitability for older people with cognitive impairment who are living in the community, the results from that study, and to talk to you a little bit about where we'll be heading having done this testing and the next phases that we're planning for our research agenda. So a bit about the Australian context. Basically, we've been undergoing major social care policy reform in both our aged and disability sectors, and in our aged care sector that commenced in July of 2015. So we're a couple of years into our new program of reforms. We're in a situation where we have moved from a program of delivery which was very much about the delivery of particular sorts of services. So particularly in community care, the government was funding services to provide particular types of services. So services that would do house cleaning or domestic assistance, personal care. We had programs for social participation, but each of those were set up in particular areas, and people were using those services if they needed that type of help. The reforms in Australia. Hello.
Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, we can't see your screen at all. I'm going to take that control and then give it to you again.
Okay, thank you.
I'll iron things out. Just bear with me a second.
Okay, great.
So I'm just going to try that again now. Okay, looks like it's working again. Do you want to try your presentation?
So it seemed to, did you have it in the beginning?
We probably missed the second slide. We missed.
Okay. The second slide, okay. I just wasn't sure if it was when I went to the full screen view that you lost it. Yeah. So I'll keep my eye on the chat box in case it happens again, but hopefully it'll be all right. Okay. Okay, so as I was saying, we're going through and experiencing some major reforms here in our system, and it's very important for us at this time to be able to understand and to be able to assess outcomes for people as we go through these changes. So in the context of these changes, the government rhetoric around these new programs is that we are now going to be entering a market-driven system that is fair and flexible and sustainable. And this has been in response, like in a lot of other developing countries, to the large increases in the proportion of people who are ageing, and the government attempting to respond to the increased needs of that population for social care. So in terms of the aims of the reform, we're hoping that older people will have better access to information about the types of services that are being delivered, easier access to a range of aged care services, more support for care at home. And this is one of the focuses, as I said, of this particular study around trying to understand quality of life for people who are living at home and receiving social care in that environment, and also the delivery of more choice and control as part of the introduction of a consumer-directed care system within the country. So looking at our overall national aged care programs, basically we have a new screening and assessment process, so a screening gateway, which consists of a helpline and a website to allow people to have their eligibility assessed to receive information about the sorts of care that they can access. People with lower care needs can still go down the track to the right where they have a less intensive sort of assessment, and they can still gain access to government subsidised services through our Commonwealth Home Support Program. So there are still some individual services being funded. So things like people who might need Meals on Wheels, or just a single service like a home care domestic sort of type assistance, can go down that stream of care. Those with higher needs are given a much more comprehensive multidisciplinary assessment by an aged care assessment team. That's usually a home-based assessment in Australia, and people can either gain access through this scheme through a home care package. So rather than purchasing individual services, the person chooses a provider of their choice for their care. They're given a personal budget for their home care package, and their supports are delivered through the facilitation of a care plan where through the model of consumer-directed care, people are supposed to be having more choice around the types of services and supports that they receive. And we also, as in most other countries, have a residential care sector for people with very high level needs that can no longer manage to live at home with support anymore. So the home care packages program is for people with more complex needs, and that has been the program in which the study I'm going to talk about tonight has been located. So what is consumer-directed care? I'm sure that a lot of our international audiences are familiar with this term, but in the context of our home care packages program here in Australia, we talk about it as a model of service delivery which is designed to try and give people more choice and flexibility. People are no longer called clients or customers, but consumers of care, and they're supposed to be given a choice around their preferred care provider and the types of care and services that they receive. I think there is also a big emphasis in Australia around increased transparency and accountability for the costs of care that are being delivered. And so we've seen also a shift in policy in Australia where people's financial means are assessed, and there's a sliding scale contribution in relation to how much people pay for their own care and how much the government contributes. So that is also a big shift in Australia, where we see this principle of the idea that if people can afford to contribute to the costs of their care, then they should. So in Australia, in terms of our population, we are definitely one of those developed countries who is ageing with cognitive impairment. In Australia, we have currently about 300,000 people living with dementia. And our projections are similar to other countries in the sense that this will increase threefold by about 2050. So really looking at the way that our aged care system here is supporting people with cognitive impairment, people that are living at home with dementia, is a really important issue for us. We also know in our population that our older people are aging with frailty. So it's not just cognitive impairment, but actually a very high prevalence, almost 100% prevalence of comorbidity in older persons. So we're getting a very big range in, you know, from almost half the population to almost whole in terms of which studies you look at, that are living with multiple comorbid medical problems. So these people are frail, they're living, as I said, with cognitive impairment. And in the context of the migration history of our country, we're also ageing within a multicultural society. So 35% of the population in Australia over 65 years were born in another country. So this is another thing that we have to consider in terms of the way that we might be going to be able to deliver care that can meet the diverse needs of a frail population. So one of the questions we asked in terms of designing this study was, how are we going to assess the outcomes of this diverse community dwelling population? When you look at most of the research that's been done with people with dementia, it's mostly occurred in the context of residential care homes. And as I said before, this population within the home care packages program have very complex needs. We're imagining and expecting that a high proportion of them will have cognitive impairment, and they're also from multicultural backgrounds. Sorry, I'm having problems with my PowerPoint slides changing.
Okay, try the same thing again.
Sorry, Alan, have you lost your view as well?
Yes. Well, we've seen your frozen screen.
Yeah. Well, for some reason my screen won't change. So if you can try and let me share my screen again, and I might actually just stay in the slide view so that you can
okay, yeah, go back.
We can share that way. I think that's probably the way to go.
Just bear with me 1 second.
So I think I'll stay in that view, and I think we might have some more luck. So let's go with that way.
Thank you.
So the motivation for this study was around trying to understand methods of assessing social care related outcomes in this complex community dwelling population. So in terms of conducting research with people with dementia, I think Heather Wilkinson and colleagues in their very seminal text about research methods and motivations with people with dementia provide a very strong case around the fact that people with dementia really do have a human right to be included and to have their voice heard. We know from research that people themselves with dementia want to be included, and we know that many people with dementia can quite effectively provide consent if the research has been set up in a way that makes it easier for them to understand what it is that's being offered to them in terms of the research experience. We also often have proxy family carers that can assist in negotiating that consent process as well. But we should always be sure when we're doing research with people with dementia to be looking at their assent all the way through the process. Really, the principles around this are that as long as the benefits are outweighing the risks, then people with dementia should be included, because the benefits of their inclusion, both for our understandings and for their experience, usually far outweigh the risks associated with it, particularly when we're talking about social care related research, and we're not talking about people having to consent to engaging in, pharmacological or surgical sort of type interventions. So in the context of our home care packages program that we have looked at evaluating, the idea of doing direct research and gaining people's own voice in relation to their experience of services is also very consistent with this new system that we've introduced around consumer-directed care, where older people with complex needs are viewed as consumers and as the ones that should have the choice and control and the say over the way that their care is delivered. We know that people with dementia with the right times of support can usually show preferences, even if they can't necessarily make the corresponding decisions. And we know also that gaining people's insights into their lived experience can really improve the way that we deliver services. So we have various ways of thinking about methodologies when we're working with people with dementia. We know that methods can be adapted. So we can use standard sorts of approaches like interviews, where we look very hard at the settings in which we deliver those interviews, the language we use, providing people with the opportunity to be well briefed and well prepared for interview context, to revisit their answers rather than thinking that they may be able to participate in just a single experience. We've also seen the adaptation of a lot of surveys to allow people with cognitive impairment to participate. So in the areas of dementia, we see a number of tools around health-related quality of life or general quality of life instruments that have been developed specifically for people with dementia. And then in the context of things like adapting methodologies, we also see these principles of easy read, which have been utilised by the ASCOT group in the adaptation of the ASCOT easy read. So we've got easy words and short sentences, big writings and pictures, and some easy read formats even have sounds so that you can listen to the words. We didn't have that with the ASCOT easy read, but it is an option. We also know with research with people with dementia that we can look at enhancing methods. So doing things, creating, providing people with stimulus and pictures, and the use of communication aids and observation techniques are also helpful. So in looking at the ASCOT tools, the domains that Anne-Marie has already outlined for us really did cover those domains that were very important and expected from the delivery of this program of community care through home care packages in Australia. So the tool was very appropriate for us from that point of view. It was provided in multiple formats, so the fact that we had different ways of trying to assess against the same domains with a complex population that hadn't been well measured yet was really significant and important to us in making the decision to partner with the PSSRU in this project. And also we had some experiences, some early experiences with the use of the self-complete version, which had been trialled in this same home care packages program by Michael Fine and colleagues in Australia earlier, who found the self-complete version feasible and valid, but actually found that only half the population could complete the self-complete, and so they were very reliant on proxy data, and that increased our motivation to try and find a way to be more inclusive of people that were cognitively impaired. And the ASCOT tool tools have also been used as part of a quality initiative pilot here in Australia in aged care sector, so we have some context to compare that. So the principles behind the development of the ASCOT Easy Read are to enforce and see out the principle that people who have a disability should have the opportunity to get information in a way that they can access and understand. The original version of the survey that we tested was designed to be supportive of completion by people with disability or cognitive impairment using those principles of Easy Read, and it was developed and beta tested with younger people with intellectual disability and autism. So our question would this tool be suitable for older people with cognitive impairment, and what proportion of our home dwelling population with complex needs would benefit from this type of tool? So here's an example of what one of the Easy Read questions looks like. This is the food and drink question. So you can see the orienting picture at the top, which provides people with that prompt around the fact that the question is about them getting a variety of food. You see some quite simplified text, very easy read text. And the other thing that distinguishes the Easy Read is the use of the visual scale to help people select their responses. So we trialled the use of this Easy Read to measure quality of life against the ASCOT domains in this community dwelling older population, all with cognitive impairment, using the staggered reveal method, which the team had used in the initial development of the survey. This means that we show people the picture and we ask them to describe what they see in the picture. We then reveal the next part of the question where we just show the text and get them to discuss how they feel in response to that test. We then show them the response options and ask them to choose. And we ask about the pictures and the text and get their perspective on whether there's any need for changes to make the survey easier to complete. We were able to trial that with an initial sample. We analysed that. We made some minor revisions to pictures and response options and wording, and then we retested those the revised versions with another small sample, and we've analysed the interviews as well. So we're very lucky to actually have both the qualitative data around the way that people with cognitive impairment are thinking about those domains when they're scoring them, as well as to have a small sample where we've been able to score quality of life with the ASCOT Easy Read tool. So as I said, only minor amendments were used to make it more suitable for the older age group. We had to enhance the text size to make it a bit larger in a lot of cases. We've increased the picture contrast to address the issues with visual impairment. And we also made some minor modifications to response options and pictures to suit the older cohort and the Australian context as well. So that's our sample. It's quite small, I know, but you can see that we had an age range from about 63 right up to a person who was 99 years old, mean age of 82. We didn't have very many people in our testing that spoke a language other than English, so this is something we'd like to be more inclusive of in the future. We had a fairly even split of gender and education. We had most of our people living with a carer, some of whom were co-resident. Interesting for us, whilst everybody in our sample screened as being cognitively impaired using our mini-cog screening tests, only 9 of the total sample actually had a formal diagnosis of dementia, which is reflective of the situation here in Australia, where we have many people who are living with cognitive impairment who aren't diagnosed because they haven't sought that diagnosis out. We have quite significant delays between onset of symptoms and diagnosis. The people in this cohort also had sort of a moderate degree of functional impairment on their scale, and they were level 1 package down the bottom of the scale there is the lowest level of package, and level 4 is the highest. So this group was sort of somewhere in the middle in terms of their functional impairment. So the modifications that we made to the home reflected the emphasis in the older cohort around in the safety domain in the home, around their real emphasis on the fears of falling and getting hurt. So because that picture wasn't represented in the original version, our participants told us that this was one of the things that they were very concerned about, and so they wanted to see that picture and that sense of them mobilising and the fears that they had around falling represented in the picture as well as in the text. Similarly, when looking at safety in the local area, we altered the pictures on the basis of the feedback from our participants that they really wanted to emphasise those issues around the fear of falling and getting hurt, and the risks to their safety they felt in mobilising when they were out and about. We also had to more significantly change the pictures and the text for the occupation domain because the examples given in the original version of the Easy Read around free time, going to work or college, they weren't relevant, and some of our older people had quite a lot of trouble identifying the meaning of the pictures. They thought the woman in the middle of the original version was shopping, and they found the picture at the swimming pool very difficult to understand, so we were able to replace those with more meaningful pictures for this cohort and just alter the text slightly. The visual response scale, we had mixed responses to. So we had some people who really didn't look at the visual scale at all to help them when they were choosing their response options. So you can see that in the quote in the left-hand side, I didn't look at any of the smiley things. Some in the middle who kind of were influenced, I guess, by the idea that they didn't like the idea of being grumpy. So that was perhaps not an appropriate use of the visual scale and needs some consideration. And a third group that were definitely using the visual scale to reflect their emotional response to the question. So we only had one participant in our sample of 26 who we thought there was some response bias in his answers. He had quite a low cognitive score on our screener. He had problems with his short-term memory, and when we listened to the transcript, he really needed constant reorienting to the questions to re-clarify the meaning of each question. So it's possible that his degree of cognitive impairment really didn't make him appropriate for the use of the Easy Read as the only assessment tool. We also saw from the qualitative interviews some tendency of the older participants to relativise their quality of life in relation to their age and disability. So I was often quite surprised that people would talk to me about how they were thinking about that that segment of that domain in their life, and then they would choose a response option that was one higher than I might have expected given the qualitative feedback they were giving about it. But overall, the qualitative responses certainly indicated that the wording and the pictures were helpful in assisting people to rate these areas of their domains, and that the minor changes that we made to the wording and the pictures improved the suitability of the survey for our cohort as well. So in terms of quality of life, we were in a situation where we were able to identify the major areas for the people with cognitive impairment that we were able to assess using the Easy Read, and the sort of highest areas of need were in those higher order domains around social participation and meaningful occupation. And I guess that's probably not a surprise to people who have been involved in this type of work before. For us, this is the first time anybody has assessed quality of life in people with cognitive impairment that are receiving these types of packages. So these are really important outcomes for us to guide the way that we might approach improving the way that this sort of care is being delivered. The control domain is particularly important for us as well, given the shift to consumer-directed care. So in terms of what methods we found this population needed, we originally tried to recruit 300 people to assess their social care-related quality of life. We did that by mail, phone and email, and we ended up being able to trial and assessment of first the social care related quality of life 4-level self-complete tool, and we found that in this particular home dwelling population, a fairly high proportion of people that responded to our invitation to participate could complete the self-complete. We had 12 of that 48 unable to do it, and 8 of those were assisted to actually be able to report on their own outcomes by using the Easy Read. So this is in a subsequent trial where we looked at the way these tools could be used across a whole population. So most could use the self-complete, some were unable, some of those were helped by the Easy Read, and a smaller proportion were still going to need other methods to assess their social care related quality of life using the ASCOT suite. So in response to that, we're really looking at trying to do a next round of recruitment. We know that we weren't successful in recruiting those people that had more higher degrees of cognitive impairment, and we have recognised the fact that we're going to really need to build carer trust to do that. In the context of recruiting people now specifically with cognitive impairment, we're going to be looking at using an adapted version of the care home CH3 tool, where we'll be doing informant interviews with talking mats with people with dementia, as well as a direct care observation, and trialling the acceptability and usefulness of video to assist that in the community context. And our research questions in that context really are, can the multi-method CH3 be adapted for use in a community setting? Will interviews in the community setting be enhanced by the use of a talking aid? In this case, the talking mat, and we're hoping with our research partner that we'll also be in a position to conduct an intervention to respond to that quality of life data that we collected around the needs for lifestyle engagement activity to try and improve social participation and meaningful activity. For those of you who've never seen a talking mat, that's one of them. That might be something that we can get ASCOT to do a seminar on us at another point about their partnership as well with talking mats and their use of that. So I won't dwell on that one, but I'll open up now to any questions that people have on the basis of the work that we've been doing here in our community care population.
Thanks very much, Lynn. That was very good. Thanks a lot. I'm just going to take a quick look to see if we have any hands in that. No, it doesn't look like there's any questions at the moment. Have you got any response?
Thanks, Lynn. It was really interesting. So I really enjoyed seeing the results. I know I was involved in the early stages, but it's the first time I've seen some of that data. So that was really interesting to see. I mean, I think there'll be another opportunity for people to ask questions at the end. Mm-hmm. So, and it may be that people are taking a while to work out how to raise their hands and type the questions in. So don't feel that if you're worrying at the moment about how to ask your question, you can take your time and type it in during the next two speakers' presentations, and there'll be another opportunity to ask questions to everyone, I think, at the end. Definitely. I know we're running a little over, and I apologise for the technical difficulties. This is the trouble with doing live webinars in multiple countries. So I think we'll just carry on. Thank you again, Lynn. And
no problem.
And then hopefully we can hand over to our next speaker, which is Ismo, is it?
Okay.
Hi, Ismo.
Can you?
Yeah.
Hi.
Give you control now.
Okay. Okay. Show my screen, I guess.
There we go.
Can you? Okay.
See, yeah.
Okay, I will start from here.
Okay.
Okay, so good evening. Okay, good morning, I guess, for most of you. I'm Ismo Linnosmaa. I'm coming from Gold, Finland, and I work at the National Institute for Health and Welfare and also at the University of Eastern Finland. I work as a research professor at THL and a professor of health and social economics at the University of Eastern Finland. So I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to give this talk in this webinar, and I will talk about applications and experiences about ASCOT in Finland. So I will most of the experiences that I'm going to talk about, it comes from the XLC research project, that is ongoing project, and I'm not going to talk much about the results, but I will tell you about the sort of experiences that we have had throughout the research process. Okay, I think my screen is also stuck, so I think I have to use the same method as Lynn was using.
Yeah,
so
that's
could you?
Right.
Yeah, let's do it. Yes.
I'll just take control back and give it to you again.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Maybe you can. Okay, this works better.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Now you are able to see. Okay, very good. So I will give a very short overview of ASCOT in my talk. Actually, Anne-Marie said most of things that I was supposed to say, so I have only few. I think I have only one slide to talk about here. Then I will talk about first applications of ASCOT in Finland and give you sort of. Then I will talk about, at the same time, I will also talk about the XLC project, that is ongoing project that we are running at the moment. And then I will talk about our experiences of translating ASCOT in the XLC project. I will talk about assessing preference weights, our experiences about assessing preference weights that we have received in the XLC project, and finally about collecting data. And then I will conclude my presentation. So ASCOT, this is the only slide I'm going to show you about ASCOT, because the next one is sort of redundant, because Anne-Marie said most of the things I was supposed to say. It's an sort of abbreviation. It's an adult social care outcomes toolkit. These instruments have been developed at University of Kent in England, and it can be used to measure social care related quality of life and also the effectiveness of adult social care services. And ASCOT is a preference weighted instrument. It's a preference weighted quality of life instrument. And I'm going to skip this slide because Anne-Marie said most of the things that I plan to say here. So all of the people in the audience should know everything what I'm going to say about this one. And then I will start to talk about the applications of ASCOT in Finland. We had first translations of ASCOT done in Finland. We translated parts of the ASCOT instrument into Finnish already in 2011. So we translated self-completion tool and a couple of instruments that can be applied in care home settings. And we applied those translated questionnaires in several research projects. I applied those instruments in Helsinki City voucher research project and also in the evaluation of personal budgets in Lauttasaari. And then Aija Kettunen, who is working at DIAC, she applied ASCOT, those translated instruments at least in two research projects that I'm aware of: efficient and effective production of welfare services and new possibilities of organizing welfare services. And I thought that I would give some sort of feeling for you about the results that we had in these early research projects. So I'm going to give you some results that we received in Lauttasaari project. So we were studying service users with family care and irregular home care. Sample was quite small, but the mean quality of life in the sample was 0.72, which was quite high. And social care related quality of life was at least half for 77% of the individuals in the sample, and it was at most half for 12% of the individuals in the sample. And then here you can see the distribution of social care related quality of life. It's sort of consistent with the sort of descriptive information I just gave you. And when we were doing these studies from 2011 on, we didn't have any Finnish preference weights. So basically we were applying preference weights from England in this project. And then a few words about the ongoing research project XLC. It's an international research project, and we aim at translating ASCOT instruments into German and Finnish, and our goal is also to explore validity of the translated instruments. We also measure preference weights in Austria, England, and Finland, and our aim is also to study and compare social care related quality of life in Austria, England, and Finland, and study and compare effectiveness and cost effectiveness of home care in Austria, England, and Finland. So it's a huge project, and we have several goals to accomplish, and a lot of work to do in this project. We have participants from England, from University of Kent and London School of Economics. We have participants from Vienna University of Economics, and also from Finland, from THL. And we started this project in April 2015, and we are going to continue with this project until the end of August this year. And then I'm going to move to the translating part, and I will give you some experience. Then I'm going to move to the experience part. So I'm going to first talk about our experiences from translating ASCOT, then our experiences that we have received from modeling preferences, and then finally our experiences from collecting data using the sort of translated ASCOT instruments. So basically, when we translate ASCOT into different languages than English, we need to ensure validity of the translated instrument. So we have to ensure face validity of the translated instrument, and we also need to make sure that the translated instruments are cross-culturally equivalent with the original instruments that have been developed in England. And you can use official translations to achieve these goals, and official translations often use a multi-stage process which contain at minimum forward and back translation and professional reviews and pilot testing and cognitive interviews. And our experiences, we used official translations in XLC, and our experiences from the official translations are that they are useful, and you get a lot of feedback from professionals and service users during the translation process, and this information is very important when you are finalizing the translated ASCOT questionnaires or any quality of life instruments. The cost of official translations is, of course, that they require time. So we started, I think we started in June 2015, and then the sort of final translations were ready in March 2016. So it takes a little bit of time. And then I will move to the estimating preference weights for the translated instruments. So application of the translated instrument requires the estimation of country-specific preference weights. We can't be sure that the, for example, preference weights in Finland are the same preference weights that people in England have estimated for the ASCOT instruments. So maybe there may be differences, and if you want to apply ASCOT in Finland, you have to, at some point, you need to estimate also the Finnish preference weights. So basically, there are three steps that are essential in the development of the preference weights. We must have data in order to estimate the preference weights. And secondly, we have to develop appropriate choice experiments for data collection phase. And this data from these choice experiments are then used to estimate the preference weights or assess or elicit preference weights. And finally, we need to develop models to estimate preference weights. I'm talking about sort of statistical or econometric models here. And a few things about choice experiments first. So basically, discrete choice and best worst scaling experiments have been used to elicit preference weights. And these two methods seem to provide quite similar results. But it has been argued that best worst scaling is cognitively easier for respondents than the discrete choice experiments. Our experiences have been that best worst scaling experiment may still be challenging because respondents often face several sequential choice tasks, which is potentially causing loss of concentration in the end of the experiment. But of course, often you can assess this possibility by asking respondents about the difficulty of completing the experiment during the data collection, and in this way you get a feeling about whether this kind of loss of concentration has happened during the data collection phase. And then a couple of things about the statistical or econometric models. As a starting point, multinomial logit models are often used as a starting point to estimate preference weights. And these models can be extended to allow for taste and scale heterogeneity. And our experiences from the modeling state has been that multinomial models are quite straightforward to estimate. But then again, modeling taste and scale heterogeneity are the challenging parts in this process. And finally, thirdly, you often need a specific software to estimate these models. So it may not be possible to apply standard statistical softwares to estimate these models. And finally, a few words about collecting data. So ASCOT data collection requires often interviews, and data on expected situation is typically collected in interview settings. And I picked some of the experiences that we have had from data collection in the XLC project. Creating representative samples might be challenging because, well, this depends on what kind of population you are looking. But if you are trying to recruit old people, for example, in the interview, it might be challenging to have the representative sample of old individuals in your study. Secondly, data collection requires lots of time and resources, and this is very important to remember if such data collection activities are being planned. So this is a good thing to remember for us. I think it took more than 1 year to have the interview data collected. And then long interviews may be challenging, especially for older individuals. So one also have to consider the length of the interviews when you are designing these kind of studies using the ASCOT. And you can find more experiences from our blog, interviewers' experiences of encountering home care clients in Finland, which was published last summer, June 13, and you can find it from the XLC project website. So basically, this is it. I'm coming to the conclusions. Translated ASCOT instruments provide good tools to evaluate social care related quality of life. Recommendations for the adaptation, and I have a couple of recommendations for the adaptation of ASCOT in the different countries than England. I think it's wise to use official translations and then reserve enough time to estimate preference weights and reserve enough time and resources to collect data using the translated ASCOT instruments. Okay, so I was much faster than Lynn. Lynn had many more things to say. That was my presentation, so thanks a lot. Additional information, you can have it from me.
Thanks very much, Ismo.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll just have a look and see if we've got any raised hands or questions. No, nothing at the moment. And as Anne-Marie said earlier, feel free to put questions forward to us at any point. We'll get to them at the end if you didn't feel like you were able to ask it at the moment.
Yep.
So yeah, nothing right now, isn't it? I think what we'll do is move on and hand over to our final presenter, Birgit. Okay.
Okay.
I'm just going to take that control for you. So, hi Birgit, I'm just about to give you control. Okay.
Thank you. So I'm Birgit Ruckeschitz from the Vienna University of Economics. I work there as a senior researcher at the Research Institute for Economics of Aging. And I'm talking about ASCOT for service users and carers and the experiences we have in Austria using these tools.
I think you just need to click on show my screen on your control panel. There we go.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Good. So can everyone see the screens, right? Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
Good. So this is what I thought could be interesting for this presentation. So the first is sort of an intro. So what really matters to people and what does it mean to collect quality of life outcomes? The second point is why are people in Austria interested in ASCOT? So so where did this come from? The third point is I will talk about 3 projects in Austria where we used ASCOT. And the final part is some experiences we had in Austria from the EXCELC project. So Ismo already mentioned the EXCELC project, and I will cover this as well and introduce some and talk about some findings we have in Austria. So what really matters to people and why is quality of life such an important aspect? Well, when we look at people who need support in everyday life, then we look at one of the most vulnerable groups in a society. And we would like to make sure that also these groups have a good life despite their limitations. And so as a society, we set up services and we provide informal help to assure that those people have a good life. And nowadays it is more than just being clean or having enough food or keeping warm. It is more that we would like to have for them. So we would like to set up services that really matters to people, and what is also relevant from different perspectives is we would like to make most of our limited resources. So we pay for those services, or we pay for carer support, and we would like to get most out of it in terms that people can live a good life. Why has ASCOT gained such an interest in Austria? So, and this is the answer is basically how ASCOT works. So people were really, were really interested in getting the results at one glance. So, and I would like to introduce, to illustrate this with data from the care homes in England. So, in 2009, I went to England and I had the chance to work with ASCOT data together with the team of Annetten. And Annetten and we came up with the cobweb diagram. And it looks like this. So you have seen this in the presentation of Lynn. You see the cobweb diagram with all the ASCOT domains. And after data collection, you can include the data of current social care related quality of life. You can see how well a certain population of people do, or how well a person does. This sort of cobweb diagrams is nothing new. So this is not really new because other instruments also use such cobweb diagrams. What is really important is that you can add the expected quality, social care related quality of life. So the quality of life people would have if they had no services. And including this, you can see the social care related quality of life impact. In this case, it is a gain. So people get more in terms of they are more happy with the food and drink when they have the services than without the food without the services. And what you can also see is the room for improvement. So if a country or if a provider wants to improve the services, then they know where to look at. And the same is true, for example, for occupation. There you see the impact is not as large as for food and drink, and there is a bit more room of improvement, which is a situation we would expect for long-term care services, particularly for care home services. So we could do more in terms of occupation, we could do more in terms of social participation if we provide the resources for this. And as this is such a very, very catchy picture, people got really interested and said, hey, we want to have something similar for Austria. We want something similar for our own non-profit organization. Can you help with this, and can you give us support? And this is what we did basically. And now I turn to the experiences we have with ASCOT in Austria. And as mentioned in the introduction, I would like to give 3 examples for home care and for daycare centers. And those 3 examples for daycare centers the examples for daycare centers is based on a qualitative study. And when we think of daycare centers, we usually think that people, well, they have something to do during daytime, they get to know to other people, they can have a chat, they have food and drink because they get meals, and overall someone looks after them, and so the personal safety is fine. So this is what we usually think when you think of daycare centers, at least in Austria. And doing this research, we could get more insight. What does it mean to have food and drink? Where are the positive aspects and where are the negative aspects? And I would like to give you this example for food and drink. So what makes people happy? And one of the quotes were, well, I do not have to prepare the meals myself. So there's someone who supports this. I go to the room and they serve some meals and I don't have to care about this. And the other one is, I started to eat again. And in this example, we see how relevant this service is to a person to survive. Because when she loses interest in eating, then she loses sort of strength, she loses power, she loses energy, and this is not good for survival. So in this case, she said, I started to eat again, and even I gained weight. And this is, for this person, it was a good thing. On the other hand, what we learn when we look at this is, let me take a very famous dish in Austria, goulash, originally from Hungary, but people love it. And goulash was served with a glass of water or a glass of juice. And when you ask people what they would like to drink when they eat goulash, people say, well, you know, goulash and beer go together. Well, you can ask for a beer, but you will not get it. So this illustrates some of frustration, what people would like to have, but they don't get it. It is not the case that they mean that they would like to have an alcoholic drink. I don't think so. It is just that there is a certain way of eating and a certain way of cultural thing that people would like to have. And in this case, it is the example of goulash and a beer. Now, when we do these exercises for all of our qualitative data, we realized, well, a daycare center does much more than just offering food and drink or some games or social participation. So we really found evidence for almost every domain in the ASCOT toolkit. And we concluded, on the one hand, we can, using the ASCOT toolkit, we can learn more about what people like and what they do not like. But we can also learn more about the actual importance of specific services. So in our case, the daycare centers offer more than games and company. They even offer opportunities to take a shower and to increase people's cleanliness and comfort. They have nice surroundings, so people feel very well when they come to these daycare centers because everything is nice and clean. And probably everything is more modern than they have at home. The other example relates to home care, and this is a huge program. This is the Austrian Home Visits and Counseling Program. And it builds on a cash benefit. So people in need of care, irrespective of their income, get a long-term care allowance when they have a certain level of needs. And this is allowance, a cash benefit that consists of 7 levels to account for different levels of need. And in line with this cash benefit, there is an insurance, a quality insurance regulation. And this means that a person, a care allowance recipient who receives this cash benefit, is visited by a graduate nurse, and the graduate nurse assesses the care situation and offers counseling and advice. And this is done for a sample of all the more than 450,000 long-term care allowance recipients. It is done, I think now it is more than 20,000 people who get a visit per year. And the aim of the ASCOT project, and it dates back to 2009-2010, was to add a long-term care measure to the assessment instrument. And at that time, we sort of adjusted the ASCOT concept and the ASCOT idea. Well, I'm sure the ASCOT team is not very happy to do this now, but at that time where everyone was playing around with ASCOT and how could ASCOT look like, this was quite an interesting exercise. And we came up with quite a comprehensive reference scenario for home care. And this is what I think the Austrian experiences could add to the research around ASCOT. And this research was funded by the Austrian Federal Ministry of Social Affairs, and the tool was implemented in 2011, and it has been used since 2011. So the ministry collected data and uses the data for assessing the situations. The other example is the home care quality of life audit, and this is an example from a provider. So there's a non-profit organization. I think this is a non-profit organization very famous in the international context, the Caritas. The background for the project was that nursing managers from this organization visit home care clients to assess the care provided by their company. And they wanted to shift the focus to quality of life outcomes of the home care service provision. So, and the aim of the project was to do some joint work with a colleague from the National Institute of Health in Austria and nursing managers from the Caritas, and to basically take the ASCOT concept and implement this into the setting of the non-profit organization. And we further developed the reference scenarios for home care and came up with 2 publications currently just available for the Caritas, for the staff of Caritas, a manual and a tutorial. And they have implemented the tool also in their IT system. So they can get those cobweb diagrams for single care recipients, but also for care recipients in a certain area. Yeah, so let me now get to the second major part of this presentation, our part in the EXCELC project. Well, you have already heard what the EXCELC project covers. It is a 3-country study. 4 organizations involved, 2 in England, 1 in Finland, and 1 in Austria. It will last more than 3 years, which is good for research and funded by several organizations. In terms of work packages, we are just sort of in between. So what I can tell is what we have done and what is still to do. At this time, I cannot show any results, but I will give you I will let you know where we can pick up on the results later. So the first work package was on translation testing instruments, and as Ismo said, the instruments have been translated. Validation is still pending, also writing up results. The second work package is on establishing preference weights. So the same is true for Austria. If we want to sum up all the scores and calculate the total score, then we have to have preference weights in order to get a proper total score. The data have been collected, so this was an online survey done by a company, and we collected about 1,000 cases for the service user instrument and 1,000 cases for the carer instruments. And what we need to do is to run the final models and to write up the results. What is also very interesting is, of course, exploring the variations in long-term care outcomes, not only within a country, but also across all 3 countries. So the data have been collected. For Austria, we could achieve 636 service users, 344 carers, and of both, we got 150 pairs, meaning that is we have interviews from the service user and their carers. If you want to visit our web page, you can find blogs also on the experiences from conducting structured interviews with long-term care recipients, so with a very specific group, and the challenges our interviewers faced. But you can also see some first results, or first impressions from the interviewers on the life of home care service users. But in terms of quantitative analysis, we are still about to complete the data, to do the modeling, and of course to write up the results. And the last work package, and you see the work signs got bigger and bigger, is exploring the relative efficiency and the cost effectiveness of such systems. And this is a work package we really need to work on. But I would like to give you some more insights into the work package 1, the translation issue. So, of course, we do this research in Austria, but we also included people from Germany, so that we can make sure that for all 3 German-speaking countries, Austria, Germany, and Swiss, we would have a tool that can be applied, and then every country could think whether they want to improve the tool for their country, but basically it can be used. And the process, it was a challenging work. It took us quite long, so about a year. We had help from a translating agency and from the EXCELC team from Finland and from England, and of course from the ASCOT team. And this turned out very useful. The process consisted of several steps on concept elaboration, forward and backward translation, and then reviews, and many more. And I would like to focus on the concept elaboration because I think this is very useful for those countries who are interested in translating the tool. So for example, the concept, one domain is called control over daily life. And this was really difficult to translate this into German because a literal translation did not work. And so we had to find a way around this and to make sure that the meaning is fairly similar. And this was a challenge our Dutch partners experienced as well. The other one were cultural differences in how people talk about their feelings. So there's this domain dignity. And in English, it means sort of whether the services help me to think and feel better about myself. And this phrase, to think and feel better about myself, was also very tricky to translate into German, because we would not use this to explain our feelings. And so also for this concept, we need to find a meaning that corresponds to the English original. And there were other minor concepts, like whether something is okay, which appeared to have a more positive meaning in Austria than, for example, the English. And so this is quite interesting, and this is really important to get this right before you start the translation process. And luckily we had help from experts, and we did some pilot testings, cognitive interviews, and so on, which helped us to improve the tool. And yeah, the report, it is not a mistake, but it really is more than 1,500 pages, and it documents everything that had been done. And for German-speaking countries, the tool will be available in September 2018, and you can find this then on the ASCOT webpage. Yeah, what are the next steps? So many things are going on, many things have been done, but what are the next steps? And as I said, we are working on the results. And if you're interested in the results, there's one date to remember, which is the 10th to 12th September 2018. And there will be a conference in Vienna, the ILPN conference, so the International Conference on Evidence-Based Policy in Long-Term Care. It will be hosted by my university, so we are involved in organizing the conference. And we will organize also a session where we explain, where we talk about the results of the EXCEL project and the preference study, the quality of life outcomes, variation, cost effectiveness across all 3 countries. So it's not only the Austrian data we present, our English project partners and the project partners from Finland will contribute to this. And of course, you can find many more topics on long-term care if you're interested in. And there's also a conference website. If you're interested in, just send me an email and I will let you know the details and where to write emails when you're interested in. And basically, I hope we see you there. And for now, thanks for listening to this talk.
Thanks very much, Birgit. I think we have a question in this room for you from Anne-Marie.
Hi, Birgit.
Hi, Anne-Marie.
So I have a question for you, but also for Ismail. I was thinking about Lynn's presentation at the start and talking about finding kind of adapted methods for people receiving home care that have cognitive impairment. And I just wondered if you and maybe Ismo afterwards could talk a little bit about your experiences with the home interviews that you've been doing, and whether you have any sense of how easy it was for older people with cognitive impairment to take part in those interviews, and any kind of thoughts or comments picking up on this issue more broadly in home care.
So it definitely isn't. Sorry.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So it definitely is an issue to have a tool that allows people with cognitive impairment to contribute, and this is why I think the easy read versions are really important. So when we translated ASCOT, especially into German, because German seems to be quite a complex language, so when the English response options is about half a line, the German ones is 1.5 lines. So, and this is why it makes more complicated. On the other hand, people are used to this complicated language. But when it comes to certain cognitive disabilities, then they are also with the home care service users. And we had some people who were happy to participate, but who simply couldn't. And so we had to say, okay, in this case, we just make a carer interview. The majority of people coped quite well with the ASCOT instrument, but there were some people who had difficulties, especially with the expected questions. So, for example, when you ask people, okay, how would your situation be if you had no help from the home care worker, for example? Then people sometimes said, well, it would be a disaster. So they didn't respond to the response options, which you would like, you would like to have, but they gave another answer. Or then I have to go to the care home, and this makes such types of interviews difficult. And this is why I think having an easy read version is quite a cool thing, and it makes the whole interview process more doable. On the other hand, some people had no problems answering this. So our oldest respondent was 101 years old, and he was the fittest. So it really depends on people's cognitive abilities.
Brilliant. Thank you. Ismo, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I can say a few things. I think I also welcome the easy read version. I think it will make the sort of interview process easier, faster, possibly, because I was in a couple of pilot interviews myself, and I noticed that we have a long sort of questionnaire that the respondents had to fill, and we had to go through the long questionnaire. And the ASCOT part seemed to be very difficult for individuals. So people were able to answer the questions that are related to the use of services, and of course their own health, and various background questions that are related to their background. But ASCOT was sort of challenging part of the questionnaire. So I also think that the easy read version is the sort of welcome thing to do, and we haven't checked yet. I believe that we have very many, as Birgit already said, we also have very many old individuals in our data set. So we didn't have that sort of dropping out of those individuals who are very old and not able to answer our questionnaire. So, but we haven't checked whether we have individuals with memory problems in our data yet, but we will do it quite soon. But for them, I mean, as Lynn was saying in the beginning, I think it's also very important to study quality of life of those individuals with memory problems and dementia and these sort of things.
Brilliant,
yeah.
Thank you. I don't know whether Lynn wanted to add anything to that. We've referred to your work there, Lynn, but I think it's quite interesting.
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
So I would say that in terms of our experience, that I think having the easy read format definitely made the interview with older people with cognitive impairment more focused. So it was much easier to keep the person on topic and to use the pictures as a prompt to remind them and provide a focus for what it was we were talking about. So my experience of trying to interview people with dementia without some kind of prompts like that has been that they're much more likely to go off on a tangent and find it difficult to kind of sum up and summarize what it is that they have been talking about. So I guess the thing for me is that I'm still not sure yet, because obviously the work we've done has been very much just looking at the suitability of the instrument, and we've only just started to look at it in a small population as to how many people are actually facilitated in the process of self-completion. So when you looked at that small flowchart that I showed, it was only an additional 8 people that could actually do the Easy Read survey without the support of the interview context. So, I mean, I feel so convinced by the benefits of having that structure from the Easy Read that I've almost decided that I'm not sure that I want to do an interview with someone with cognitive impairment without having a visual prompt with me anymore. But I'm just going to be very interested to see the extent to which that format actually also does facilitate people's ability to self-complete rather than just as an aid to an interview format.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lynn. Thanks, everyone.
So, Big, you asked a question earlier. Do you want to just ask your question to Lynn now, or do you want me to read out what you wrote?
Yes. Lynn, I was interested in, did people comment on their responses? So did people say why they picked a certain response option when you asked them, or did you just collect the answers?
So we really tried very hard to explore what was influencing their options. So the great thing about using that staggered reveal method was that the whole process of first looking at the picture and locating themselves in the domain, then qualitatively describing their responses to the domain and then choosing an option meant that they'd actually already given us an enormous amount of context around what it was that they were thinking about to help them choose those things. And I think that's why I was saying to you, probably the overwhelming thing for me is that often in their qualitative responses, they seemed more able to acknowledge the pros and cons of their particular situation, but there was something in the approach of the older person and that kind of, stiff upper lip kind of type thing that they often chose a response option that was one higher than what I expected them to, having heard them talk about the factors that were influencing their thinking about that particular domain.
So did you have the feeling that the people are more able to pick an option when they talk about what they think, or when they talk about the meaning of the questions or of the response options?
Absolutely. I think having that opportunity to reflect and to actually dwell and take the time and really, even with that sample of 26 people, it was very unusual for me not to get to the end of that interview process and have the person say, I'm now thinking about my care differently because of this process. So that opportunity to actually talk and think through what they felt about it and then to choose a response was invaluable to the insights we got about the domains, what you might do in the context of those to improve things for people, but also in terms of their ability to actually choose one of the 4 responses.
And this could be part of an Easy Read version, because when it is so important to give people time to think about and to have their own association, whatever, then this could be part of the instrument. So this is not only a sheet of paper and say, well, this is a nice picture and here are the response options and now where's your answer? But this is also part of the process to get this running.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
what we got was the emotional engagement with the domain then. So in talking about what they were thinking about in the context of that domain, we began to see the engagement of the affective component in their lives. So you began to get some emotion around how they felt about those things, and I really do think that helped them to discriminate between the options in a better way.
Interesting. We recorded the responses from our participants. So of course we did the survey with them, but for the ASCOT part we recorded the responses, and this gave us also very good and very detailed insights into how people think about this and what are the problems with certain aspects. And what also helped were show cards. So we gave them show cards showing the response options and the topic. And this was also very useful to facilitate the answering process. Yep. So these were our experiences.
Very good.
I could definitely add to that as well. I think using show cards is enormously helpful in terms of reducing cognitive load for people where they may not necessarily have huge problems with their memory, or in terms of, you know, they may not have a diagnosis of dementia, but actually just working with older adults, and actually probably all of us benefit from it, just having that show card in front to read along. I think it helps enormously, doesn't it, when it comes to responding? Okay, thank you. Alan, are there any other questions?
No, nothing at the moment. No.
Okay, Ismo, would you like to add anything else, or are you happy with that?
I have one question to Lynn, if no one else is. If there are no questions from audience, I can.
Go ahead.
I have one question to Lynn. If okay, Lynn. So I was thinking about, you know, often it's the case that you use proxy respondents. If you let's suppose that you have somebody who is demented, and you want to interview him or her, and then you know that he or she is not able to answer the question. So basically you are using proxy questions. So my question is really that if we use these easy read versions of ASCOT, so would it replace the sort of, or would it be unnecessary to use proxy respondents?
So I think
what are your experiences?
This is one of the things that we're hoping to find out. So the extent to which we're able to provide people with an opportunity to express their own choice more. So the extent to which it eliminates the need for proxy altogether, I'm not sure. I have a feeling, just because of the profile of the people we've recruited so far, so I didn't give so much detail about the second study, but really this next round of recruitment is going to require us to, I think, have a gateway through the collection of proxy data, build some trust with carers to allow us to try and assess the perspectives of people with dementia who haven't participated so far. And so we will have that opportunity to not only see how many can successfully engage or be assessed either through multi-methods or the easy read version, but also to have a look at the way that those responses differ in that dyad as well. So what do we gain by engaging in it, and what does the perspective of the person tell us, and how does that differ or not from the proxy version as well?
Okay, that's quite interesting. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Yes, good. The other thing that we're doing in that study as well is those people that were able to self-complete the SC4 version, we are sending them a follow-up easy read because we want to see what their preference is around the self-complete and the easy read version, and whether people even without cognitive impairment are assisted and answer and score the domains similarly or differently if they're given the two versions of that survey.
Okay. Yeah. Good.
Is there time to have another question?
Of course, yeah, go ahead.
Lynn, did you experience any problems in translating the ASCOT tool into an easy read version? So, for example, something what was hard to have pictures, or where the response options got really tricky. Did you experience something like this?
So I was very lucky because a lot of the hard work of that had already been done by by Stacey and James and the team at ASCOT. So I just originally tested the version that they had developed with younger people with intellectual disability and autism. So the changing of the words was fairly minor and was more about the nature of the kinds of activities, for instance, in the context of the occupational domain. We didn't have to do very much other changing to the wording to suit the older cohort. And I only administered the tool in English, so I haven't done any translation. I guess there are context differences in Australia. We haven't done any of the work to look at the way our population views quality of life and whether it's similar and our preference weightings would be similar to the UK or not. I imagine there may be some differences, but when I hear about the big studies you've been doing in your countries, we're very much at the beginning of our ASCOT journey here in Australia.
Great, thank you, Lynn. Thanks, Birgit. Okay, is there any other questions either from the panel or if anyone would like to raise their hand who's listening?
Nothing from the audience at the moment, no.
Okay, well, I think it's probably time to close. We've run slightly over, but not too bad. I'd like to say thank you so much to all of our international speakers. And we have been recording this, but obviously all the speakers will have the opportunity to listen back and tell us as and when they're happy for this to go live. Obviously, some projects are still waiting to publish results, so it may be that there's a little delay before things can be published on our website, but that is our intention down the line at some point. Thank you all so much for listening. I know for some of you in some countries it's antisocial time, so we really do appreciate that. And any feedback you would like to give us here at the ASCOT team regarding the quality of the sound. I know we had a bit of technical issues in terms of the actual PowerPoint slides themselves, but I think we managed to overcome that. So hopefully it didn't ruin the experience. But yeah, I hope you all got out of it what you needed to, and if you have any questions, then do obviously come back to us at the ASCOT email address.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much.
We'll end it there.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.